All right, everybody. This is the Archive, and today we have the co-founder of the Archive, BJ Carpenter, and we also have an ally and special guest of the Archive, Isaac.
What's up?
And today we're going to be talking about the concept of the union of opposites, which is a very esoteric, very occult idea. It's something that I know Isaac is very passionate about, something that BJ is very passionate about. We on the Archive actually have a segment called the Union of Opposites. So we just kind of thought we would explore the idea further in a discourse-like format. And so here we are.
Yeah, we're just going to have fun talking about Union of Opposites, where the conversation goes.
Sounds good. Yeah, and I was pretty curious.
Now, it was originally Isaac's idea.
Oh, yeah.
To talk about this, yeah. So Isaac, you were actually the one who wanted to talk about this with us. Have you been thinking about the concept a little bit?
Well, I've been talking about it a little bit lately, and actually the reason why I thought we should, since we may be doing a recording tonight, was since you guys have been talking about doing it for a while, I kind of want to make sure my things that I'm coming up with aren't too much on yours, but more that we are interplaying our concepts and our content off of each other, which is good. So I'm happy to see your guys' concept kind of brought out into the light, into the light of day, and see what you guys think of all this. And also just that I was thinking back to the conversation we had election night, Connor, when you were talking about some of your biggest fears of how it might go this way or that what it may do is drive bigger divides in our culture, which now I'm starting to see. And I was trying to be more optimistic that night, but now I see the way that it has gone, and we don't have to get super into politics, but we can on this sort of philosophical level, or the level of union of opposites sort of idea. But what's going on is the way that this is going, deciding the election, however that it ends up in the long run, we'll see. I don't know. But it's causing that biggest divide it possibly could cause on that. Like I said, even that night that we talked a couple weeks ago, I wish whoever won would win very decidedly. So then we could say, okay, that's a very good representation of the culture and what's going on in the people. So now we can say, okay, that's decided, and let's go on from there. But because it was so divided and so contested, and still probably will be for years, probably all the way up until the next election, it's going to drive these divisions in our culture even more. And so these things kind of go on all the time. But go ahead. Oh, did you have something to add, Peter?
Yeah, I was just going to say that happens literally every facet of our society is going to be like that. I don't think there's ever really, there's spectrums all across the board, and that's why we want to bring up the union of opposites as a great concept, aside from any one particular manifestation of this concept, as it's in our philosophy to understand, as Jung did, and as other occultists and esotericists in the past have, that all things that occur in reality are occurring within a spectrum of sorts that bounce between two polar opposites. And that opposition and duality is what actually defines everything. Like you are only you because you're not everything else, and this thing is this because it is not that, and that's how definition is formed and clarity is interfaced with. And then so we could talk about it in politics or any specific manifestation in society or whatever, but that's more like our philosophy. We're just trying to elucidate that point to get it across to people, because ultimately it's also our philosophy that in order to transcend and move towards betterment, you have to integrate the opposite rather than just ignoring it or destroying it. So that's kind of where we're coming from in our channel.
And it garners us a lot of criticism, I would say, because, someone today literally said to me that I was weak because I refused to take hard stances on things. But, that's kind of what tribal people have to say. If I can see the utility in both sides of an argument, but that person can only see the utility in one side, they really have no choice but to denigrate me, because because if they acknowledge that there was a good it was good to try to excavate through the utility of both sides. It would poke a huge hole in their tribalistic adherence to one side.
Right.
So it's
Yeah,
not like an easy position to take. Most people would rather be on a team with an overarching philosophy, and it's hard to see both sides and understand that there's no unequivocal way when it comes to these spectrums.
And so I want to go back to what Isaac said specifically really
Yeah.
quick. Now that we kind of just did the little bit foundation work, but that being said of like tribalism and picking a side or whatnot, it's all coming from a place where people are trying to get to a better place, right? Everyone wants to be correct while they destroy those who are incorrect. But the idea is like integral philosophy is that all people, all things, all philosophies, all whatevers have some semblance of truth. And there's this interplay between like objective truth and subjective truth, and how truth can shift, I guess, given the reference or the domain in which we're inquiring about who is right and who is incorrect. And that's what we try to highlight with the union of opposites in general. So to bring it back to your question, or like how you're talking about polarity in our political spectrum arena or whatever, I don't know. That's probably one of the hardest ones. Politics and religion are two of like the hardest opposites to try to reconcile together.
Yeah.
And the last thing that I want to say is that when we talk about reconciling the opposites, it's not the same thing as not picking a side. It's not the same thing as being in the middle and not doing anything. It is literally integrating the opposites together and then finding a transcendent third mode, which it literally requires both sides. It is not just taking a side in the middle.
And in order to do that, like I said, you have to be able to see the utility in both sides. Otherwise, it's not even an option in your mind to try to create that third thing.
You can imagine it as a line segment having 2 points, and that's what defines the line segment. And everyone wants to be on one side of the line, and everyone wants to say that their side's correct. And if you sit in the smack dab middle of that line, then you're part of the opposition. You are an enemy. But really, everyone's trying to get to the transcendent, which is above, which creates a triangle. It's no longer a line segment. And in order to get to that triangle, it requires the 2 points and the third. So that's the whole philosophy. But yeah, so you brought up politics, so let's jump into it if you want.
Well, a little bit, and the reason is, and then again, to kind of stay on the that same path or mode of sort of transcendently looking at these modalities that are going on. The reason is because I am a staunch independent political person, and that I never really take a side, or at least not the Democrat, Republican, red, blue side.
Bipartisan bullshit.
Yeah. Although I was kind of tempted this past couple of weeks, not because I'm all like, yay, either side, but because, and I was talking about this yesterday with an interview I did with my high school friend that's a Washington reporter now. And it's that when you look at either side, it's that, okay, on the, what was it, that C-SPAN hearing last week with Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey, it's like one side is like, yeah, we should have perhaps some regulations on social media or big tech, as far as we don't want it to be used as a tool for anything violent or abuse of children or that type of thing. And then the other side is like, oh, you just want them to not push the liberal narrative more, so you must be out to get us and you must be horrible. No. And they're just like rooting for more censorship. And they're like, oh my God, I'm so happy that you took down that Trump thing and this Trump thing and that Trump thing. And they're using this, like, I think they only get like 2 or 3 minutes to speak. And each senator that had a minute to ask questions, and the left senators were usually taking about most of that time just to rail on and on about how happy they are about how the election went and how horrible that is that people are saying other things online. So anyway, the reason why I'm like tempted to jump on one side is it's that one side seems to be defending truth and democracy and freedom more, and the other is like, oh, because you're defending that, we're going to do the opposite of that. But then the reason why I like really have resisted and still resist to jump on either a train or either merry-go-round spinning around is because I know that's exactly what'll happen if I say, okay, I'm all like MAGA now, or I'm all like Republican, or I'm all like this or that because of truth and freedom and liberty and democracy. Then all of a sudden I have to defend that and say those who are against me are wrong, and those who are against me are
Right. You have to role play at that point, and
yeah.
then you're taking the
Yeah.
totality of that entire political spectrum as an ideology that you have to defend, regardless of whether.
And even
or
if
not,
I don't do it, then everybody else expects that I'm doing it. Like if I say,
Right.
hey, defend Trump because of democracy or whatever, and that, like I've
Uh,
even had to do that in some of the like Facebook comments lately where I'm like, I don't care if Trump or Biden is president. That's just a reflection of how the populace has chosen to run the world. But we do need to know that our elections were run as fairly as possible. So what the heck is wrong with having transparent elections and having investigations to make sure that everything is on the up and up? Like, what's the worst that can happen if you're so sure Biden won? Then what's the big deal? Just have the investigation, and if it works out, either side won, then great. But it's like, oh, you must be a mega man because you want like an investigation. It's like, I don't care. I just want democracy. And so you see how it like sucks you in just as
of course.
just taking aside for like truth, democracy, freedom.
Yeah. The problem is public opinion and perspective, and that's why with our channel we're hoping to shed some perspective and light on the complexities of the nature of reality and life and what it means to be a human being in a social construct. Because exactly what you're saying, you're playing a role, which is much more of an abstract, bigger concept than just the union of opposites itself, or like just recognizing that opposites are what define everything. And it's good to be afraid to pick a side, in my opinion, to some degree, but we have to live on one side or the other, practically speaking, until we get to a level cognitively and in our conscious awareness where we actually can integrate opposites. It's totally natural, human, animalistic, tribalistic in our genetics, and it's in our biology to pick sides. And competition runs hot in our blood, and reproduction and fighting and clashing and trying to just eat and survive.
And what's really going on right now, real quick, is that there's this, like, what we're doing is we are slaves, or maybe not us, but a lot of people have become slaves to the mythology that's playing out.
Sure.
Because it's no longer about like election or who's president. It's about whose idea is winning.
Look, I mean, every war that has ever been fought, both sides have gone into that war with a sense of complete rightness. They're the devil, and we are the arbiters of morality. That's true whether you're talking about fighting a nation or you're defending a position at the Thanksgiving dinner table against someone in your family. You always do that with a sense of complete rightness. And I think because of that has come to this extreme apex in this modern time. We're kind of seeing the shadow of both sides, the left and the right, manifest in a way that's visible to the world. And that's one of the things, in the sense, that's a good thing, right? Like, it's kind of stirred up the status quo a little bit, but it's also forced us to question these antiquated styles of government and styles of politics. And I think what's around the corner is either one of two things: either a union of opposites, which is what we all hope for, or a complete divide that is irreconcilable.
So to go back on,
we'll see which one happens, but I'm hoping that it's the opposites.
Yeah. To bring back what Isaac was saying about just the nature of people and where the climate of the human animal sort of in the mental realm is going in the postmodern world, is where we're subscribing to mythos and like complete ideologies rather than this or that. John Gebser was a psychoanalyst or a psychologist who created this sort of system and maps of, I guess, like the human experience on a global scale, on large societal scales, in which people subscribe to similar worldviews, and everyone's world is sort of defined by very specific reference points, and most of the people in the world or in that society at that time exist on the same, I guess, like bubble. There's like 6 or 7 major bubbles, and in the pre-rational archaic mythological, pre-rational, rational, post-rational. These are sort of like Gebserian ways of describing the world. And what I've seen in the past is people have all been on the same bubble for the most part. They're just arguing about specifics within the bubble. So in the mythological era, it was like, my God is more real and important and strong than your God, but everyone subscribed to the very specifically similar aspect of what reality is. In the rational world, and as people advance into these new bubbles, as we evolve in the way that we view the world, it's like more and more people are left behind in the old paradigms as new people are shifting towards the evolutionary paradigms. And we're at a point in history in which there is so much divide, not only about the specifics of what we're arguing about, but the actual bubbles in which everyone is in their actual mode of viewing the world. Some people are in those.
That was exactly my point.
Some people
exactly the point I was trying to make.
Some people truly believe in like a personal God who's like a man with a beard in the sky. There's people who are pagans still who believe in like multiple deities in this way and that way. Some people are totally, completely like Jungian people who understand. Everyone we're no longer on the same wave where we're just discussing details and nuances. We're completely not speaking the same language to each other. And that
primitive man didn't argue over what shape the planet was, in other words, is what you're saying. And now ideas fragment so much that we have a multitude of disagreements that just
and it's not even, because before it was disagreement in a similar spectrum where everyone sort of had the same worldview, consensus agreement upon what is happening, and everyone's just sort of talking about the details. Now the foundation in which we all stand as we have our discourse is completely separated and segregated and fragmented to the point where opposition is absolute, and you have to pick a side in order to survive and not drown in this chaos.
And this is what I think is happening, and I think we've been experiencing this especially for the last since in the modern world, where all these tribal communities and different parts of the world that used to be, because like when you say we could be unified on one sort of worldview, that would be within a tribe or a village or a kingdom,
right?
But it would be very fractured in that a tribe, village, kingdom, like a mile away, a mile away or half a world away or any distance away, might be similar in a lot of ways, but also totally different. In fact, it's funny, and sometimes I think of how, like, if the more you learn about the mythology and the religions for our known history, they're all very similar, but have some very some details that get changed around.
It's a perennial philosophy. Essentially, there's a term for it. It's called the perennial philosophy.
Right, but it's also very similar to how, like, if you look at the goals and the values and the principles that flow through, conservatives and liberals or right and left and also major world religions, they're all very similar.
Yeah, so, to Connor's point. Yeah, exactly.
So it's like, the way that I look at it now is the world hasn't changed that much. It's just manifested differently.
Correct. 100%.
Right. So what we have is this world still full of all these different mythologies and quote unquote gods. Some of them may be real, and that's up
their
for
skin
debate.
Is different. Now it's political ideology, or this is called this thing, or people experience it in this way, but it's always been the same.
No,
I agree.
No two tribes who think identical or look identical have ever gone to war, because there's nothing to go to war over if there's no difference.
Right.
We fight over differences. We fight over differences where the plot of land that you happen to have been born on.
Right.
So all the way to that level.
I would call that an archetype almost, as a kind of what you're hitting on. Like, that is the way that I use the word archetype.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily subscribe to like the traditional Jungian. That's an archetype, like everything you're talking about. But
so what happened is, now we have, like, within one country, like America especially, that's very diverse. This is the reason why that, like, the whole world is like eating popcorn and soda, just like watching the reality TV of our drama play out in our politics, because if you go to Europe, like it would be it would be very different.
It's
Like
more homogenous.
Well, like in Europe, if they had a leader of the European Union that they would have to elect, it would play out very similar to how our president elections play out. But they don't really have that in any other country, where you have these huge states that are united, and then they have this federal bureaucracy over them
thing.
that is then elected. And what that is, it's like a conglomeration of all these tribes, or villages or kingdoms. Yep. And then they have this one over them, and it's like a
it's beautiful, but
it's like God's
weird.
Competing for that highest value
for Mount
position.
Olympus, kind of.
Yeah.
They're like trying to sit at the pinnacle.
So I think the newest tribe that we sort of ascribe to is the sort of figuring out how to do the non-tribe tribe, which is the ability to look at all of these and say, we're globalism, basically.
Well.
So, but to look at all this tribalism that's going on and all this division and this everything going on and say, I can be friends with anybody in all these tribes. I can be whatever. I can see their points, and I don't have to get involved in it. At least not like that. And I can still have these intelligent conversations, not completely be detached. Right. Like so Connor's friends were accusing him for being weak for
So on that, so
I think that takes more strength to resist that pull. But go ahead.
With our channel, we have some episodes recorded that aren't released yet that will be released by the time this is released, in which we kind of talk about why we do what we do, and living and let living, and understanding that ideas are just ideas, and people conflate idea for identity, and that causes a lot of people to not be able to actually have conversations with each other anymore in the same exact light that you're kind of getting at, Isaac. It's like we subscribe to ideas in a way that is too individualistic or too I guess personal.
Divisive,
we just personally take our ideas in a way that, like, we conflate an idea with an identity. So you and I, if we disagree, then I feel like you've tarnished my name. I feel like you've actually rubbed dirt on my soul, rather than just disagree with something that I have an opinion about. And and that's a big deal. And I think a lot of that can be absolved if we actually switch our perspectives from these tribalist, sort of dualistic points of view to a more globalist point of view, in which everyone's part of the same tribe, everyone's brothers and sisters under the same sun. And that's easier said than done, and it's very hippy dippy. But ultimately, though, if you do, and Connor, I'll let you jump in right after this, if you do subscribe to the evolution of societal worldviews from one tribe to the next, and then something like the United States or a nation is born out of a system of tribes, and then entire continents are born out of nations coming together, then eventually you just have a globalist society in which everyone perceives themselves in the light of oneness, and then you can go beyond that and go into the interstellar. It's very linear in this sort of sense, and it's doable. But
it's always doable on the individual level. Any individual can start to see things like that at any time.
Right. And so, but the problem is that not enough individuals do. And the way that our psychology works, as we like play these roles when we interact with groups and we lose ourselves in groupthink, we have to transcend those things too.
Okay, but there is one group that you don't necessarily lose yourself in. And please forgive me. I'm going to sound like a propetarian for a moment, but I'm not for sure. But one tenet of their philosophy is the idea of familial groups. And so that's why I think that the one tribalistic tendency that actually has utility is our connection to our family. Like I have people in my family who I love who think radically differently than me. Some of them I even think they think things that are dangerous. But because you have that familial attachment, it challenges you to be more willing to put yourself in that person's perspective. And that's kind of why I don't think globalism can work, because we happen to have this biological connection.
Right. And so that's the thing, is the biology of the family. And if we can get past that, if we can somehow, either through genetic modification or like really, really strong inculcation of the youth to get beyond that, I think that, because there are
starting to sound like Plato's Republic.
No, I mean, Plato's Republic is where it's at, although it's a little scary in practice, because people are people.
I mean, that's been the foundation for all these utopian things that have tried to come up the last few hundred years.
But there are African tribes, and I can't quote one exactly, but I've read about them in which, you know, people like there's no paternal lines. It's sort of like this weird cesspool of like love, and everybody's everybody else's family, and the tribe takes care of the tribe, and like we have this patriarchal paternal society because it was all about tracing lineage and keeping blood within the blood and making sure that your children were your children and not your cousin's children, and being able to like pass on wealth and power through familial lineages. And I think that if we can get past
Now you're
that,
starting to sound like a fascist.
no, it's the truth though. I mean,
Well, there's some
that,
utility in that, I think.
No,
some
I know.
evolutionary utility.
I'm just
in knowing who your kids are,
Yeah.
I think.
but there's
because,
also utility
you can make
in everyone being everyone's kid and
Sure.
everyone loving everyone
well,
unconditionally.
I think that's so natural that it's always going to be there. It's natural biologically, environmentally, and mentally. That's always going to be there, and there will always be that sort of like, I love my family, I hate my family. I love my family, I hate my family, and that's fine, and everything else. But I think ultimately people need to be finding certain values. That's why, like lately, when I've been getting a little bit more fired up and sort of like into politics more than usual, it's not because I'm like, oh, now I see the mega side is awesome. It's been because I'm like, we need to know truth is truth and democracy is democracy, and it has to like totally transcend and supersede the sides. Like,
Right.
Both sides try to do that. It's like, now that we think our side is winning, it's like democracy is awesome, and then it's like,
yeah.
oh,
and I
well,
think each of us at an individual level have the propensity to see the faults in one side more than the other, and it doesn't make you more correct than the other person. It just means that that's your psychology. It's easier for you to notice the lies on the left than it is for you to notice the lies on the right. Just like someone on the left it's easier for them to spot the other faults on the other side.
So to kind of mix what Isaac said just now with Connor, what you said earlier about the nature of warfare, for everyone always feeling like they're right and they're fighting for their value systems, we also have to be careful in what value systems we deem as proper. Isaac, you say truth and democracy, but truth and democracy, just in the same way that you're describing, it's like the left says, oh, okay, now that we've won, truth and democracy. But before we won, there's no truth and democracy. So although, I agree, we have to be correct in selecting our value systems and creating those hierarchical structures. We also, there's more to the whole picture, and
it's always changing.
And so.
And it's contextual.
We have an episode where Connor and I talk about the difference between absolutism and relativism. And my ultimate take on it is that absolutism exists. There are absolutes in the reality that we live in, and there is such a thing as absolute relativism, in which as individuals we only know our relative truths within the spectrums that lie within the absolutes. And so like what you're saying is there are absolute value structures that we should uphold as the highest goods in society and as individuals, but we also need to take a look at our subjective truisms as how do we go about selecting the correct values, and how do we also inculcate people correctly? Because otherwise, just like you said in Plato's Republic, we could say truth and democracy, but then it's like we become the arbiters of truth and democracy and ultimately destroy it by trying to inculcate it into everyone by force.
So this is why that the oldest, or one of the oldest, or most primary, or most universal, highest values is, and Dr. Peterson talks a lot about this, is the that which pays attention. Because if you, and that's why you got the eye at the top of the pyramid and Horus's eye and everything else, is because whatever a person does, whether that they jump on the merry-go-round of the right or the left and they get sucked into this or that polarity, and even if they're extreme on one side or the other, or if they go to the middle, or they get on some other trip, or they play the game of I'm not getting on that, sort of like we say that maybe we try to do, or I try to do, is I'm not getting involved in that game. That's still another game. The not getting involved in that game is another game than the left and right game. So
meta games.
But whichever that it is that you a person chooses, the best thing to do is pay attention to it. Like, that's why I think
that's the first step. I think that's the first most important thing. But
it's like first in its foundation. Well, because what happens then is whatever that you're doing, whether you jump on or you're doing the game of not playing the game, there's going to be values that rise out of that, and there's going to be things that you see in that individual position or playing the individual game, that the important thing is seeing the values that kind of shake through that, or the values that kind of like you can only see that way. And then later, like if that position doesn't work out of any of those games that you're playing, whether it's right, left, or neither right nor left, or in the middle or whichever, then you can learn those lessons that you can only get that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And to bring it back to BJ's point, like what you just said, that people, when they say like, let's not play the game, that's also a game.
Right.
It's the same thing when people say that there's no absolute truths. By saying that, you're actually saying that there
You're
is an
implying
absolute truth,
that
there
truth,
is no absolute truth.
Same thing with the postmodernists and their system of hierarchies and down with the patriarchy, because hierarchy is bad. Same thing. You can never, we live in a very frustrating reality in which you cannot really, can't get away from these opposites that are always dancing with each other.
Right.
And so it's very neurotic of us to think that we could ever find a series of better things out of a destruction of the opposition that we use to define our viewpoints. And so that's ultimately how I feel about things. But one thing that we're talking about tonight that is something I struggle with a lot, that I'm frustrated with in general, I'm going to move away for a second to a different topic, is the nature of biology, the nature of human psyche and psychology to require our actual personal individual experience in order that we as an individual can gain any wisdom and knowledge, that we're not born with any real knowledge and understanding of the higher orders of the thought form. Like, there's biological genetic sort of like instinct, and there's genetic memory and epigenetics and all these things, traits and characteristics that are passed down, but ultimately, like, knowledge of language, mathematics, ethics, morality, art, anything that is of the higher orders of the mental faculties requires our actual physical personal experience. And I can go through my entire life reading every day of my life, studying avidly, paying attention, and ultimately I'm going to die, and that knowledge is going to be lost with me unless I record it somewhere and hope that posterity does the same degree of work that I did to get to a similar place that I did in my personal experience. And something that I posit as a function, a mathematical function of societies. It's actually, I've written about it in my book so far. There's a mathematical function that can describe the nature of societies to hit an apex point, in which the level of work that an individual has to do in order to get to the same degree of mental faculty that their predecessor did in the immediately preceding generation, that level of work continually increases as a society evolves and remains succinct. And
I think increasing is the wrong word. I think changes is the wrong word.
No, but things change, and so, like, for instance, with the Great Conversation, there's so many things that people don't even care to think about anymore, like ancient, archaic ideas. Science is improved. We're not on these old paradigm thoughts anymore. But whether or not people are aware of it, those thoughts that they've forgotten to care about paying attention to are at the foundation of the means in which they actually intuit and experience their world. The actual hardware that they use to go about their lives in the West right now, whether or not they're aware of it, is controlled and created by this system of this conversation that was happening. And so what I'm getting at is that there's a level of work that a person has to do as an individual in order to do their duty to uphold the actual sovereignty of the nation or the group that they live in and take part of, that builds their actual hardware. And there comes a point in all societies where they collapse because the level and degree of work that an individual has to do is too great as that society becomes more and more nuanced and evolves in different directions. And we're just limited by our biology. There's a level that we just can't break past. And now with the advent of things like computers and the internet, artificial intelligence and augmented reality and virtual reality, we actually have a chance at transcending unlike we ever have before, especially now that we're globalizing and we're no longer limited to just single limited tribes, to where I feel like actually for the first time we may have a chance at unifying opposites and actually transcending and actually evolving beyond this circus and bread and cyclical shit that always happens, where nations rise and fall and people just never actually escape anything. Because the last thing I'll say in this
So-
giant fucking the last thing I'll say is Isaac said earlier, nothing
Mm.
actually changes. Everything's really the same that it always has been. And that's how I feel. Technologically, things have changed. As it's manifested, things have changed.
Right.
Human beings are still the same. We still eat, shit,
The
fuck,
psyche's still the
kill
same.
each other. Exactly. We are sad, we're happy, we kill each other, we steal from each other, we eat, we shit, we burn things for our energy. And it just so happens that I have electricity now, but I don't realize that it's still like petrol fuels being burned in factories to generate the shit that creates my electricity. We're still burning shit for our energy. We haven't changed at all. So yeah, I don't know.
I don't think we've changed as far as what we have the capacity for. But I think like if you accept, and I know Isaac does, I don't know if you do, BJ, but if you accept the idea that the human personality, the individual, is something that's fragmented into a multitude of different impulses and things that have will,
Sub-personalities.
that almost like they're alive inside of you. You have
Yeah.
to also acknowledge that in different times in human history, different facets of that spectrum are more alive than others. So like Carl Jung once said, because I agree with you guys that things don't necessarily change. They're just they're manifestations of the same thing.
the same
Jung
consciousness.
did once say that every generation faces its own unique set of problems, and that might seem obvious. It might seem arbitrary, but I don't think it's arbitrary. I think most people think that we're trying to solve the same problems of every generation, but I don't think that's true. I think it's kind of like it's a macrocosm of your individual life. Your life at an individual level is always throwing new problems at you throughout different stages of your life, and it's almost throwing more at you than you can really handle. But but it overlaps a little bit. So yeah, the problems of the last generation are manifesting now, but there's also this new subset, and it pulls out different parts of us.
But that's why there's a level in which it collapses upon itself, because there's always new and we're always changing and things are always shifting. But just in the same way that you have to build a house on a foundation, and if you need a 2-story house, it's built on the top of the first one, then the foundation. It's always changing upwards. It's always getting more and more nuanced and more complex. But there still is a level of work that has to be done in order to get to the point where you can recognize that nuance. And then you've done the work to get to that point. Now you have to do work to get deeper into the nuance where it has expanded to, and then you have to do the work to get past that part as well. And so I feel like
and right now you probably look at yourself 2 years ago and think, man, that guy was an idiot. But then 2 years from now you'll look back at yourself today and think, man, that guy didn't know shit.
Totally.
But that's kind of like the nature of, you know what I'm saying? Like it just to add on to your point, it's kind of like I kind of lost my train of thought, but it's like there's always something new to be learned. And it's kind of like Terence McKenna's novelty theory. Like I think what you're hitting on is that things will always complexify over a long period of time, and that's kind of like the structure of reality.
Yeah.
And so I get what you're hitting on.
And so like I'm not in argument with you at all. I agree with you that problem.
No, not at all.
The problem, as the problem manifests, it's the way it manifests will change, but there will always be a problem. Problem is an archetype, right? And problem has to exist in order for growth to occur. Problem is,
and if it doesn't exist, we create problems.
Yeah, exactly. And
so, but BJ, would you say that like if we did hit to this new level that you're talking about, where we're at this turning point where we could finally transcend the old? Could you even anticipate what new problems would manifest out of that, or do you believe that we could get to a place where?
Right. So that's what exactly. I'm glad you asked, because that's kind of what I'm getting at. Is there will always be problem, because the nature of reality is to be dualistic, right? And no matter where we are, the greatest the higher that we reach towards heaven, the greater demons and hell that we actually create, in order to balance it out. In order for a heaven to be achieved, there is a hell that we have to sort of use as the point of reference that we move away from as we work towards this heaven. And there is, in my opinion, an ultimate way to actually unify the opposites of the foundations of actual.
It's all done consciously. You can't do it any other way than consciously. And the only way that happens is starting at the individual level, like we're doing now, then it branches out to more individuals and more individuals and more individuals, and which is like the whole reason that we have these kind of conversations and we do these kind of podcasts and everything else.
It's all we can do. But that's part of why I'm frustrated, Isaac. That's exactly why I'm frustrated, and why I say, like, there's a level in which there's a point in which you can't work anymore, and you will collapse as an individual. The society is too big for you to actually interface with to make a positive change, and the level of work that you have to do to get to that point is too great, and then it collapses and everyone has to start again. It's my personal
well, even just
hypothesis.
to get
But
an example, like a modern example of what you're talking about, like right now we live in a time where there is less suffering per 1,000 people than there ever was. There's less death by war, there's less death
if
by
we
gun, there's
look
less
at it
murder,
objectively,
there's
yeah,
less poverty.
perhaps.
Objective, but because of that, it seems like you might be right. There's also this other subset of problems where people lack the ability to find individual meaning.
Right.
And people are more hedonistic, and people are
and I think it goes into
pleasure over meaning.
It goes into a lot of what I was saying a minute ago, how that if there's not enough problems going on in our immediate world, we create them, which I think is what a lot of what's going on in the culture now.
It's because we haven't transcended, like because we're individuals. Because we are individuals, we are almost incapable of actually transcending to the degree that we will forever transcend this human flesh and be actual gods. Like, because you're right, we create the problems because problems have to exist, because otherwise the problems don't exist and utopia doesn't exist. It's the whole concept of yin yang. But I guess what I'm trying to say in simple terms is I'm frustrated with the fact that I'm going to die and all the work that I've done will be lost on humanity unless I record my ideas and then other individuals do the same degree of work to get to a similar place as me.
Well, that's how it's always been.
But it's frustrating. It's like, why? That's why I'm excited for AI more than anything. That's why I'm excited for like the potential idea of humans jacking into the fucking literal matrix, like creating a system of data that we can plug into as soon as we're born. Imagine being born and then being able to download all the information that ever existed so far in your society, and for your actual biology to be shaped in a way that allows you to understand that information almost the moment you're born. Imagine what the world could be like instead of us having to go through and repeat the same shit over and over. I have to burn my hand on fire to know fire hurts. And I have a son, and I have to tell him, don't touch the fire or it's going to fucking hurt. And he has to do the same thing to his kid and the same thing to his kid. And everyone has to learn by their own mistakes.
And they'll probably be like, whatever, Dad, you don't know anything. I could touch fire.
Exactly. That's the way
he was right the whole time.
Should we also take a moment, though, to consider, it's almost kind of like morphic resonance, Rupert Sheldrake's idea, that actually, even if you espouse an idea and you don't record it, it's somehow permeating into the overarching psyche of the human being. It's kind of like as above, so below.
Plato's theory of knowledge.
You're still pushing out there.
Yeah. Well, that's
so like maybe you're not. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe you don't need to record it.
You do, though. In my opinion, you do. So morphic resonance is like a reverse engineering of Plato's theory of knowledge, which states that there's a metaphysical location in actual space and time in some way in which all data that could ever occur or exist already exists in an encoded form. In the New Age, it's called the Akashic Record. Plato called it.
Right, but Rupert Sheldrake just said if you think of an idea, it makes it so somebody else on the other side of the planet is more likely to have that idea inhabit them.
Exactly, but the difference is that Rupert Sheldrake is talking as if this is actually a novel idea that someone had, so now someone else has a higher propensity of having that novel idea. Plato's theory of forms is sort of transcendental and beyond space and time, in that, like, that already happened. All that stuff in the future already happened. That person already had that novel thought. So at the very outside of space and time, outside of all history on the timeline back and forth, all knowledge already exists in some place. And when we actually learn new things, we're not learning new novel ideas. We are remembering things that have been lost as we fell from paradise. But
yeah, but I guess the only part that I challenge is that, like, and this is going to sound very Peterson-esque, but if BJ, you've got so many good ideas. If you tell one person, even one of your ideas, that one person knows 1,000 people.
Sure.
They might tell 100 of them, but that 100 people also know 1,000 people. And then therefore you've just affected a billion.
Oh yeah, totally.
With your one idiosyncratic idea.
It's just, you're talking about it like in this sliver of time. The Plato's theory of knowledge is like all time. It's like all things outside of this one sliver. Everything that will ever happen has already happened, and there is some place in which all the data is already.
So like
recorded.
transcending the human race, pretty much.
It's like
very
transcendent.
It's not just human to human.
And ideas like that make me like really, really ponder the nature of thought, of literal epistemology, of the philosophy of the nature of thinking and knowledge, because again, I'm frustrated with the fact that I will die and all the work that I've done will be lost. It doesn't matter if I devote my entire life to this one thing or that one thing. I'll die, and my son will have to do his own work in order to
Yeah.
get to the place that I'm at for all of
Well,
eternity.
so I'm not arguing with you
Unless-
at all. I'm just asking a question. What about if your son tells people, and then maybe tells his son or daughter, and then his son or daughter, and then it just goes on forever, and then your ideas are permeated through there.
But there's still a limitation of all of the effort that you have to go through to get to that same level, all of the time, all of the biological, like you have to, like, okay, for instance, you can't have children until you're 13 years old, right? Imagine, like, you can't. That's a limiting factor, like something around 10 to 13 whenever you hit puberty. There's a limitation, a hard limit to how quickly you can propagate your race, like your species. So that is a hard limitation that you cannot break unless you tweak your actual genetics. There are hard limitations in our psyche that will never allow us to ever succeed and transcend to a place that we can actually
But
escape.
aren't there hard limitations to the technology that allows us to record things? So, like, for example, like if you record something on a floppy disk now, and then 1,000 years from now, they don't have a receptor for floppy disk. They don't even know how to read it. So therefore,
that's why I'm frustrated.
Your efforts to record it are kind of futile.
That is why I'm frustrated. And I feel like sometimes that we live in a prison and not an actual school, for one. But yeah, so no, that's neither here nor there.
No, that's a good point.
Okay, so let me see if I can touch on a couple of those real quick. One is genetically, I don't think it's lost. Like, okay.
Yeah. This is a good point. Yeah.
Well, okay, because
are you talking about like genetic memory, kind of?
Yeah, genetic memory. So like the way that somebody could learn quickly to build an axe a few thousand years ago, when they just started building axes, even if they weren't ever taught very well or taught how to build an axe, happened because their father built axes. Like that was like the main first tool that we built for thousands of
years. That's morphic resonance. Yeah. That's kind of what Connor was getting at.
So same thing if and this happens all the time. It's just it's hard to empirically quantify.
Sure.
But now it's like, and this especially happens when we go through, like, we don't just like learn a different way to walk home, but we go through like a very novel experience that causes that'll literally cause your DNA to change. Like, and this is actually very developing, somewhat new, and it's actually the only way that evolution can work. It can't work through random mutation like they've been saying since Darwin, because that's just variably it just mathematically doesn't work. But with adaptation, it does work, which is the same type of thing, that a creature physically and mentally or brain structurally goes into a new environment, and he's going to die unless he figures it out through this adventure that he goes on. And in so doing, he changes his
actual DNA,
including his body, his mind, his brain structure, and everything else. That's why that we have we've learned how that our brains are formed. We have lizard brains, and then on top of that we have brains very similar to dogs, and then we on top of that we have our prefrontal cortex, or the left brain, right brain, and the frontal cortex that are very
bicameral system.
Well, they're new in that this is why that we have language, and this is why we can think in terms of language that no other animals really can. Right. So I say all that to say, I don't think it's lost. Like, even if, let's say that there was some,
but it is though. So there are degrees in which we do have genetic memory for sure. But can you speak French right now?
No, but I could probably pick it up better than somebody who maybe.
But you have to put in like actual effort to learn French, to learn anything. You have to put in actual effort.
Yeah, but you have the capacity to learn French, and a monkey doesn't.
Right,
but that's not my argument, though.
And maybe even somebody who's like from the East, a Chinese person, for example, or African person, I don't know, may not be able to learn French so easily. And that's why, like, I've known a lot of Asian people that complain about English, and I get that.
That's like a whole different thing.
Well, but I think that's
learning.
I think that's also part of their genetic memory. So I might be able to learn French a little bit more easily. Like, actually, I took a French class, and I took a Spanish class, but I got kind of bored with them, and I thought they were too similar to English.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Do you
I
think
was
it has
interested-
more like about genetic memory? Is it genetic memory, which is sort of woo-woo still, because there's not a whole lot of science there, that there is some with epigenetics, but do you think it's more like native Asians, people who actually natively learned that tonal language, because it's so actually fundamentally different, that the neural nets that they formed in their formative years are so ingrained that that's what causes their difficulty with actually learning the English language?
Well, no,
Or do you, because I know a lot
That's
of
very
Asians who are
Steven
born in
Pinker.
America. I know a lot of a lot of Black people who are born in America.
Noam
They have no
Chomsky.
problems with learning English, but then
well,
once
because
they learn
they're
English,
if any
then
of
they
their
can't learn their native
ancestors,
language.
well, any of their ancestors had what I'm I guess trying to say to the French sort of question is, if I probably have ancestors that spoke French or very similar to it. Although I'm not French, I'm more like English, German, whatever. But I probably have ancestors that spoke French or something very similar to it. Whereas an Asian person or African person, they may or may not have that. But if they don't have that, they're going to be less easily prone to learn these languages.
So there's a little woo-woo thing I want to bring up right now, which is sort of like unity consciousness, I guess. The idea of like Adam Kadmon in Kabbalah, which is like the primordial man, or I guess if we just want to take it to the extreme, like just the unity of all people, the idea that all people exist throughout space and time as like cells in the body of God, where God is sort of this hyperdimensional construct of all of the people who have ever lived, ever.
It's like everybody shares the same mind, but there has to be this illusion that we're all
that there's difference,
in
right?
order
So exactly, and I guess what I'm getting at now is that if there is this bringing up this topic of shared consciousness in the in a unity monad, because we always talk about like biology and genetic memory and DNA and what actually separates us in the physical, in the foundational particulate reality. But nobody ever really, especially the positive sort of empirically minded folks, never really want to talk about the potential for people to be connected in higher dimensions, to be connected across space and time through networks that we have no perception of, at least in an empirical sense. And sometimes I feel like we do, and we have the ability to tap into other people's experiences and our, quote unquote, past lives, even though your past life probably happened 2,000 years in the future and you just want to call it a past life. But some people get zapped with lightning and then they can speak a different language. Some people have near-death experiences and like they have complete different personalities.
And it makes you wonder if this idea of like genetic memory is actually transcended by this mental sphere that kind of exists above us all. Because when you ask a creative person when they write a book, you say, well, how did you write the book? They don't say ever that they generated the ideas themselves. They often say, and it kind of sounds like a little bit douchey and arrogant, but they say, well, I was a conduit for the ideas to channel through.
We talked
all
about
people
this.
report that. Yeah.
We did.
Yeah.
We did.
And it makes you wonder, like, if it's so on one level, it could be like a part of our brain that's subconscious. And so therefore we kind of feel disconnected to it. And then but then at another level, at a metaphysical level, you could say, well, it's this actual space that we don't have we have the limited sensorial perceptions that don't allow us to access that consciously, but we can sometimes in certain scenarios when it comes to art or architecture or writing that we can channel it through.
I might have a point that would kind of tie these together real quick. Is I haven't talked about this a lot here, but I am actually one who experiences the glossolalia or speaking in tongues in that sort of.
I can do it, but I just don't do it like on the like. It doesn't just come to me, but I can do it if I try.
And
so possessed, bro, call the doctor.
Yeah. Call the exorcist. Well, and it's not just that happens, and that it seems in a very fluent tongue, and that in my church culture that I had been more involved in the past, it's like very much of a thing. And sometimes we hear stories about a person will do that, and they will do it in a language that they've never spoken, but for some reason, now that we're all traveling around the world, they will, a person, like even people have been speaking in Spanish, so there's no way they could have been speaking Spanish, and then someone witnesses that and they're like, oh, you just said this in prayer. I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. So whether we think that has something to do with the real God consciousness or whatever the case,
Right. Practically, it still works. It still happens.
But what could still be happening there is something very close to what we're just getting in touch with, in that these deep sort of meditative prayer states can unlock that sort of genetic memory that was latent inside there, just like how you talked about how somebody gets and like how somebody gets struck by lightning
experiences,
or whatever.
I sometimes wonder when I'm and I really am so reluctant to talk about meditation at a personal level, but I sometimes wonder that when I'm in those deep states of meditation, am I experiencing the way that the average person experienced life in a more primitive day? Because it seems that way. It seems like when you're in that deep state of meditation, all you can really focus on is like this right now, and you're not really connected to your body that way. And it kind of seems like the ancient people talked about that a lot. They postulated that.
Perhaps, yeah, like being in the garden before the fall, and
exactly.
Yeah.
There's a good
before the
line in that movie Noah where he says, why do the animals not try to run away? And he's like, because they still live like they lived in the garden.
Yeah,
it's like,
exactly.
The garden is like that primitive place where you don't consider the future. Yeah.
So Ken Wilber wrote a book called Up from Eden, and in the book, in Ken Wilber's philosophy, he talks a lot about transcendence and what it means to transcend by unifying opposites, and a lot of these ideas and concepts. He criticizes the romantic philosophers because they always want to regress. It's all about regression. They always talk about prenatal consciousness when you're in the womb, and what that's like God state consciousness.
Yeah. Even McKenna is guilty of that.
Right. A lot of the romantic philosophers talk about this idea. And so they always think that the way forward to become better humans is to actually go backward in the way that our
but of course both are right. We have to include the past and transcend into the higher level. Yeah.
And exactly. And so transcendence, and back to the union of opposites, transcendence requires both spectrums. So if you're on the side that's like, no, the romantics are wrong, going backwards, becoming a child again is incorrect. I'm an adult. Why should I become a child again? I need to go forward in time. And then you have those people who say like transcendence forward comes from the opposite end of that spectrum. Isaac brings up a point that's like, you need both, kind of. You kind of need both. And that is true. And that's true everywhere. You need both in order to move to the next transcendent other. And that is exactly what we're trying to get across in our channel, as well as, conversations like this with people. And it's very difficult. It goes against everything that we are taught. It goes against everything that we understand. It goes against, it's very much a product of reason, and even meta reason. It goes beyond reason to say that this thing and its opposite are both somehow going to lead to something even better. It's beyond reason. And so to ask people to do that is almost like asking them to do magic. It's asking them to do the impossible.
It is. It's exactly that. It's not just almost that. It is that.
And you can't and you can't describe it in logical terms that are rational. It's something that you have to sort of intuit through gnosis and experience.
They have to. Everybody has to take a leap of faith. Is the thing that ultimately has to happen.
Faith or experience through gnosis, which is direct experience, like actual experience. Which is why I'm so gung ho and adamant about the psychedelic revival, the archaic revival, shamanism, meditation, even religious practitioners and practices. Like all of these things are avenues towards the same thing, which is talked about in the Perennial Philosophy, which will allow us to transcend these opposites. And that's basically what our channel's about for the most part.
And then because that's what I was talking about too earlier when I was saying that even McKenna is guilty of that a little bit, is because he talks about how all the best things are in this archaic revival. But I feel like what he kind of leaves out is that we also have to embrace these new ideas that are built upon the original structure. Would you agree with that?
He did unify opposites. He just didn't do as great of a job at defining his vision for the future as he did his enamored state of mind with the past. Because he wrote the book called The Archaic Revival. He talks a lot about the archaic revival.
I actually don't think he wrote that book. I think other people took text that he wrote and made that into a book.
Well, either way, he did spout off the concept in his oration of the archaic revival, but he also talked about the transcendent object at the end of time. And for someone to talk about such a thing, a transcendent object at the end of time, and the way he described that, I feel like he did have a grasp of unifying opposition 100%. As much as he knew about alchemy and Gnosticism and like the Eleusinian mysteries and all of the good stuff, like he knew he definitely
Sure.
had the opposites unified in his.
But maybe he leaned more on the side of romanticizing the
Yeah.
past, just so maybe
and we're human. We are going to lean one way or another. I lean towards unifying opposites. Like, that is my predilection, right? Other people are going to be like, you're crazy. No matter what direction, no matter how integrated you are, you're always in some direction.
And where does past and future unify?
Oh man, don't even get BJ started on this. He's got so much to say right now. I know.
Well, okay, I don't know if we want to totally go down that.
Don't even start.
But no, ultimately,
don't even start, dude.
I'll just try to say, kind of like, put a little bow on that idea. It's just that ultimately, we can look at the past and that's great. We can look at like ideas in the future and that's great. But ultimately, we need to, take some time of reflection on the past and plan for the future. Just like in our everyday life, we need to plan for our career and plan for our hobby and whatever else. But most of the time, we've got to be in the present. And in so doing, what that does is that's where the transformative comes together. Where it's like, screw all these plans, screw all the whatever happened in the past. Cool, that's great stuff. But because
you're gonna all of it though. Well, because that's kind of what Connor was getting at.
Yeah, it's not like saying maybe screw it is the wrong word, although that does imply a sort of a circular thing.
Well, Isaac, I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
That was clever.
How much do you think living in the present is similar or a derivative of the philosophy of paying attention? Because to me, the parallels are there. When you live in the present, you have really no choice.
It's similar, but what I was saying is that then by being present, I don't think that that's like this end-all be-all doctrine like the Eckhart Tolle cult or whatever. But it's just like part of it is like it's not like screw the past, screw the future. It's like if we look into the future and or look in the past, it's going to be constantly changing. Whereas
now is now.
But if we look at
static,
and as we enter into the present moment, we transform it just by inhabiting it.
Yeah,
we transform it into
it's powerful. There's
something better that could be there.
Yeah, I think what you're getting at is there's power in the present where there's only potential in the other, in the past and present. So, and I agree. We only have the moment, right? But where I feel like the transcendence lies in the unity of the past, present, and future simultaneously in your mental space is kind of what Connor was getting at with everything he was saying. That like, but if you're in the present, if you're truly only in the present, there's no cognition that can actually occur. Like there isn't any language cognition that can occur. The Kabbalists have.
Well, that's just talking about.
It's a Hakma, right?
That's just talking about like the meditation aspect.
No, not even. It's sort of like meditation, but the Kabbalists in the supernal triangle of the tree of life, and it's in the Etz Chaim, in the tree of life, they describe it in a very metaphorical way, in which like, without getting into all of the nuances of Kabbalah, essentially, part of your consciousness has to do with language processing, and you understand the world through Bina, and you cut down you cut things down. You cut everything. You cut it. It's reductive, and that's how science works, and that's how language works, and that's how I know hot is hot and cold is cold, because hot is nothing but hot and cold is nothing but cold, and they're separated. These polar opposites in this unified spectrum are separated by an infinite chasm of void, which allow the two to be what they are, even though in truth there's a spectrum that like links them, and it's where does hot become hot and where does cold become cold, and it's this weird subjectiveness between these absolute poles, and we intuit that reality via language processing and our direct experience. Hakma consciousness is like direct experience. Bina is like the language processing. And if we're completely, truly in the moment, not just in a meditative like sense of the term, it almost, I guess it almost is like meditation, because you can, if you're
you can make everything a meditation.
Right. But what I'm getting at
is like a flow state.
Yeah, thank you. So flow state, thanks. You cut down like 3 minutes of exposition time. If you're in a flow state, then you can't be analyzing what you're doing. You can't go outside of that flow state system to look meta into the flow state and think objectively. You are only subjectively in the flow state. And that being said, it being completely in the present is being completely in flow. And as such, we can't actually. that's the romantics talking about going backwards to the prenatal state in order to go back to the garden that we fell from is technically same thing in different language. It's being completely in the present and completely mindful. And I think that that's actually hard limiting. We can't actually do anything in that state consciously, because earlier you said you need conscious awareness to get to a better place. You can't do that when you're in complete flow. It's not possible. You have to
Well, it's a flow state of consciousness. It's like your consciousness, unconsciousness is linked up with your environment and whatever is involved in that, including consciousness. And where that it even transcends the present is that if you read the stories of people who have like experienced these flow states, and we all can in little moments here and there, but like there's these stories about like a fighter pilot that has to like go and dodge all these MiGs that are trying to annihilate him, and because he trained for like, I don't know, 10 years or something, and he knows like this is the moment to like save himself and potentially freedom and whatever else, he locks into a flow state. And there's a lot of stories that happen similar to this in war situations, but he did like these, like, I don't know, dozens of maneuvers, and to him he thought, and his body got into like a weird state of like he felt like he was out of body, but he's like flying all over the desert, and to him it's almost like a dream, that moment that really happened in reality, flying around as a fighter pilot, where it felt like it could have been 2 seconds or 2 days. And then it turns out it was something like 2 minutes or something. But inside of that time, there were all these things happening of like 2 or 3 different fighter pilot MiGs trying to knock him down, and he knocked them down.
It's like superhuman, supernatural shit.
Well, yes. So when you get into this flow state, whether it is a consciousness with your whole present reality, whether that's in war or in sometimes sports or all these different things,
or in writing or creating or whatever it is,
that too. And what happens then is it transcends even the present moment or time in general.
But what I,
like a dream state.
the one thing I want to say really quick to that, really fast, Connor, I'm sorry, is
no, you're totally good.
In order for that flow state to be productive whatsoever, it required a previous mind state that led to that flow state, in which prerequisite foundational operations were performed. So like you trained for 10 years, you got into that flow state, and all of that training, all of your cognitive thoughts, the dreams you had, the fears you had, the conversations you had with your therapist, the things you did while you were in the shower, all of that stuff, all of that processing time led into the fruition of the events of that flow state. And that's why I feel like pure flow state is literally pure. Anything by itself is not possible. For one, pure anything. That's why we live in a dualistic reality where pure everythings require pure opposites. But you're saying flow states and like conscious, like great consciousness, like reflecting back and then moving forward into transcendence. But the flow state does require that state of fragmentation, that language processing, and that's Hakma Bina, and that's what the Kabbalists talk about with their supernal triangle reference that I was trying to get at earlier. But it's like I don't want to get into the whole Jewish mysticism thing right now.
And maybe I'm going a little bit too out of the way here, but I've been thinking about what flow states are just a little bit. Alan Watts used to talk about how in his philosophy, the spiritual and the physical are not different. It's all just process, right? Yes. It's all 100%. Just this never-ending process that's always taking place, whether you think about it or not. The great metaphor for that is like breath. Breathing. You can think about your breath. You can hold it for a moment, but even when your conscious awareness goes away from the breath, you continue to breathe. Same thing with your thoughts. I think what the flow state is kind of like our limited ability to kind of ride that process and separate ourselves from that. Like kind of like you said, it's a fragmentation. You're separating yourself from a part of you that exists all the time, but you get that momentary separance from it, kind of thing.
Yeah,
I don't know how far that
is
away from the actual
that's why breath is a meme. Yeah. Breath is a huge meme. It in human history, it's an insanely large motif that exists. Right. In Sanskrit, Hinduism, in Kabbalah, it's the ruach, it's the breath of God, it's the breath of life. In Christianity, there's breath. In almost all of the major world religions, Tai Chi, all of it. And you're exactly right. It's a physical representation that literally tethers us to life itself, that is both involuntary, but we can actually voluntarily control it. And involuntarily controlling the involuntary process, we can utilize it to open up doors to nuance, to like different modes of being. Like you can huff and then fucking have a psychedelic experience, or you can breathe deeply and calm your nerves, or you can breathe in a weird way and get amped up and like cause your adrenaline to rush. So it's a very great metaphor of control and lacking control, but those are opposites. And
Right.
and those opposites are unified within the breath and the lungs and the biological creature, but it's all required as one giant system in order for actual life to occur. And that's why
it's
it's
the
one of the
same thing
most
with
fundamental.
thoughts and paying attention to. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because like
exactly.
your thoughts are the same way as your breath. I can force myself to think I like the color blue, but even when I stop thinking about thinking, my thoughts just bestow themselves upon me.
Right. And that's
I
why
don't have to try.
I always say we live in a frustrating system. We live in a frustrating reality, and why my first book is all about this process, this ontological truth of the nature of being to be full of fuckery. But yeah, and it's really struggle. It's a huge struggle. It's unifying opposites in order to transcend, and that's the entire process from the beginning of time till the end of time, until we recognize the transcendent other, which sits just outside of that veil.
So do you think a flow state in some sense is an attempt or a subconscious attempt to unify opposites, or do you think it's the opposite?
It's everything. Everything is everything
Yeah.
else. Everything is everything else. Yeah, it's both. It's literally both.
It's both. That's what I was thinking. Because at first my inclination was to think, oh, what's the opposite of unifying opposites? Because you just are, but at the same time, you're also
so like
combining the subconscious and the conscious to do one thing.
Right. That's why I say in my personal philosophy and my metaphysics, contradiction is the highest truth. But there's more to it than that, of course. There's a lot of unpacking there that I have to do in order to justify that statement, because that statement is in of itself contradictory. And if you're a logician, that shit can't really happen. But
but we hope to elucidate that with the union of opposites and how,
with the whole
is
with the
else.
segment. Yeah. So everything that we're talking about right now is like we're on so many levels, and we've explored like a lot of different avenues of conversation, but ultimately the point of the archive and the point of the union of opposites in our segment in the channel is to attempt to demonstrate that this is possible and what it looks like, because it is seemingly impossible and it's very contradictory.
Well, it's both. It's possible and impossible.
It's very contradictory. Again, very contradictory.
Let me read a short quote. It's from a letter from Carl Jung to Wolfgang Pauli. And while there was a longer section where he was talking about the investigation into the center of the atom, and then he says, simply put, if you look long enough into a dark hole, then you perceive what is looking in. Hence, this is the principle of perception in yoga, which derives its perception from the absolute emptiness of consciousness.
Right.
So
to the Dharmakaya.
So the principle there is this idea that we change what we look at by looking at it.
Yeah, that's Heisenberg uncertainty principle too.
Right. So then the ultimate way to find truth, or one of the ultimate ways, I don't know if it's the ultimate way, it is and it isn't, but it's to look inside. And then, like he said here, if you look long enough into a dark hole, then you perceive what is looking in. So in other words, you finally see the self,
which is just the self. It's so there's like
a pureness of it.
What's it called? There's a Buddhist saying, a koan that I always recite this koan. It's, what is the sound of one hand? That's the same concept in Zen, which literally, like, if we talk about the nature of reality to require opposites, if I have one hand, so here's my opposite hand, and then I clap them together, that makes a sound. So propagation occurs, waves occur, manifestation occurs, reality gets to happen because of this opposition. What is the actual sound of one hand? There is no sound of one hand. It's an oxymoron, but the more that you try to think about it and you break your consciousness by like
koans were another form of Zen meditation.
Right. So if anyone's listening and they don't know what a koan is, it's a brief statement that when you say it out loud and you think about it, it's an oxymoron. It's a contradictory statement that's meant to frustrate you as you wrestle with it. Right. And then the more and more that you wrestle with it, it's like the Chinese finger trick. The more you wrestle with it, nothing occurs until something happens and you
Yeah.
break. And in
Oh
breaking,
yeah.
you stop trying because you just give up because you're so frustrated. And in the cessation of attempting to break the riddle,
Yeah.
you find the truth. And the truth is always the transcendence
Yeah.
of those two things. And so that's the sound of one
And
hand.
it brings me back to talking about how everything is just process. There's not the spiritual or the philosophical or the mental or the physical. There's
Ian
just process.
McGilchrist is really
And
big
it reminds
on
me
that
of this
too.
great quote. And
haven't read that book
Kierkegaard
yet.
even
I really
said,
need to.
Kierkegaard said, if you name me, you negate me. By
Yeah.
naming me, you negate all the other things that I could be. And that's exactly, I think,
That's
the perfect
reductionism.
iteration of
That's
this.
language. That's how we operate. That's the only way that we as people, as individual human beings, can operate, is by reducing the infinite to a set series of finite occurring events that we use our logical process to move forward from. Like, at the edge of reality is nothing but complete unknowable gobbledygook chaos. And in order to make anything practical out of that, we create our axiomatic responses. We create axioms. We create these
And
positions that we have to have faith on. We start by faith. Everything that we do, no matter what, starts by faith. And then from that faith, from that assumption of the nature of reality to be like as it appears to be, then we move forward, and then we can like make decisions through our language processing, of which is constantly ripping down this infinite.
And the original leap of faith that we make is the idea of difference, that you and I, BJ, are two different things manifesting as itself, but really it's all part of this one overarching process.
That's the original leap of faith that begins the ego complex.
Exactly.
The ego is a complex, and we make that leap of faith sometime when we're between 2 and 10 years old, where we say, I am not other things, and other things are not me. And then from that moment that we start to project ourself on other things, and then when we project ourself onto other things, we're making those things us, and us those things
subconsciously.
There's
which is kind of why unifying
it's
opposites
nuanced.
Isn't really unifying opposites. You're actually unifying.
They're already opposite.
They're already exactly.
You're unifying.
They're already part of the same thing.
They already are.
They're
everything
already unified,
is everything else.
Yeah.
Yes, that's why I say everything is everything. Everything is already everything else, and nobody understands what that means. But to talk about Jean Piaget and in his developmental psychology, children under the age of 2, everything in their environment is them to a fundamental level, to where like they can't even think about it like that. It's like literally the titties they're sucking on for sustenance, and the parents that they're yelling at, and everything that's going on in their external environment, they perceive as themselves. There's sort of like this overarching like union of like they're plugging into the actual matrix, and as they grow older, 2 to 10, they start to recede inwards.
That's how animals are, and that's how archaic psychology is still.
That's like the shamanistic viewpoint of the world, that the external is you, and you're just you're like an extension of that. Yeah, exactly. And then as you become older, you recede inwards, and then but you don't go deep enough inside, and that process of like self-reification through a system of metacognitive process starts to unfold. That child is still trying to validate its own existence in that same light and flavor, but it's doing so almost in a neurotic way, like sort of like what Isaac was getting at. It does it in a way in which it projects self. Now it projects this image of self, and then it assumes that the environment then feeds it back. And then as we get older,
can I pose a question? Do you think that is more something that is societally reinforced, like something that we foster to bring out of the child, that they, or do you think it's maybe more something that is a part of ourselves that lives within us, that doesn't develop until a certain age, or until some external stimuli brings it out of us? It's kind of the same thing.
The societal part develops because it's in our natural propensity to do those things naturally, and then so the majority of people just emulate that and project that, and then people reflect that because monkey see, monkey do. Like we are just our environment reflecting upon itself. So in multiple layers of reflection, like
when we see dad call himself dad, that's how you know that there's that separate entity.
Exactly. And that's
his
why
dad.
that's why it's called a
Yeah.
fall from Eden. It's a fall from graciousness. It's a fall from unity consciousness into this physical flesh that corrupts all things. And then we seceded from unity God consciousness in order that we might actually perpetuate the system. Because just like a dream operates, and this is Maya, right? This is the illusion of the Hindus. This is the Brahman, the Brahma, who is pretending to be what it isn't. And there's 4 heads of Brahma, 2 are asleep and 2 are awake, watching the process unfold. It's we perpetuate the system because in a dream, in the same way you go to sleep and dream, the dreamer creates the dream and subjectively perceives the dream at the same exact same moment. The
Yeah, it's that
perception and
instant transformation.
Exactly. It is everything, it is nothing, and it is everything in between those two things. And that concept is an archetype that will never ever, as long as reality remains reality as is, that we intuit and interpret, that archetype will never ever escape us. And that is why the triangle, or the number 3, is the most fundamental shape in the Platonic in what Pythagoras had to say in his wisdom school and in sacred mathematics and geometry. That's why the triangle is the most fundamental shape that is possible in 2-dimensional planar geometry, because it physically
You don't think
represents
there's a
concept.
facet of reality that transcends the flesh, that goes beyond that where we can somehow extricate ourselves
it
from
does.
that?
It exists right now.
Yeah.
We are in it
But
now.
our limited perceptions and our flesh
we
are
don't
like
know
barriers that hold us
we
from that.
don't know and cannot know, other than maybe just imaginary ideas or these mythologies that we come up with, what it would be like to perceive outside of human consciousness.
Right.
A human being can never do that. There could be
Right.
not just like the physical. Yeah, there's X-rays, gamma rays, and all
you're
these different
always
frequencies.
you'll never escape you.
Yeah, but it makes
and
me
a human
wonder
being
that
will never escape human
Humanity.
consciousness.
Right, which is the concept
Yeah, but
of
it makes
Adam
me
Kadmon.
wonder that if there are entities that or forces that transcend physicality and flesh and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do they even know what evil is if they have no contrast to compare it to good? Are they so transcendent that they don't need concepts like that to propagate?
In the Kabbalah, that's what. So evil and good and duality only exists in Malkuth. It only exists in the very, very last sphere of the tree of life.
Right.
There is
Which
no
makes
good or
sense.
evil in the above spheres of reality.
It's just a judgment that we make from our narrow ego position that we happen to be in.
Yeah.
But if you were transcended of all this, then it's almost like sometimes they use the sort of like imagery of like, if you look into nature, like you go into like beautiful Yellowstone or Yosemite or whatever, and you see like animals killing each other, animals shitting on each other, animals doing all kinds of stuff, but all of it, you just look and you see, wow, beauty.
Right, sure.
And you don't see like evil
that's
because
something I want to talk about really quick.
Yeah, you don't see like evil because that animal killed that animal. That's just part of the beauty. And so
that's really
that
funny
doesn't
right.
Yeah,
That's such a good point.
Well, no, because Arthur Schopenhauer, who's one of my favorite philosophers ever, is one of the OG pessimists, right?
Yeah.
And he talks a lot about the will to live, which essentially is this higher concept that could take a long time to get into, but ultimately he judges reality to be this like voracious, ever self-consuming Ouroboros that is like its hunger will never be satiated, and it's sad that we live in it, and he's sad about it because all he sees is life consuming life in a never-ending fucking cycle of like literally eating yourself. It's very demonic in a way that he sort of describes it. And he talks about animals killing animals and people killing people and killing animals and eating them, and this like kingdom of events of occurrence. And then in his argument, in his writing, in his essay, he says, to those who would argue my point of view here, they say, well, look at the mountains and look at the sky and look at everything that's happening, but it's so beautiful, isn't it? Right. And he said something along the lines of like, is this demonic process something so simple just to be looked at as if it were a painting? And when I read that, it's not an exact quote, but when I read it, his point, and he wrote this in German too, and I read it in English. So when he wrote it, it's like there's this incredibly potentially evil thing happening, or incredibly good, or whatever you want to look at it as in your perception. but we always reduce it to some process, and the optimists always want to reduce it to a process using our vision. It's always about beauty. It's all about like appreciating it for an aesthetic. It's like, is all of reality is all this pain happening just so we can look at it as a tapestry and smile? Like it almost, I don't know, it was so pessimistic, but it was so like that perspective.
It's and like Connor and I talked about this when we did a chat a little while ago, is how I love 2020. It's my favorite year I could ever live in. And it's not because I'm like, yay, old people are dying. It's because it shattered the persona though. But it shattered the group persona.
Oh my God, dude.
Well, because that's how a lot of people like to look at it. It's like, oh, you like 2020? Well, guess so many people died. You like death?
No, man, I like saving money on Social Security, bro. I'm trying to have SSN when I'm fucking 70. Let's get
it. get rid of them.
Utilitarian here.
Yeah, man. It's all for the greater good, man. I need to get my money, bro.
But the group persona has been shattered, and so we see what's underneath that. We see what people are really made of. And some of it's beautiful and some of it's ugly, but and I look at it all as just like this amazing,
but it's all beauty.
Yeah. Right? This amazing just thing that you can appreciate, especially once you
that's a very
remove that facade. And I say that too, to also say that if we look at the past 100 or 200 years, and we look at like all the like 2 world wars and Cold War, and all the death of, Mao's China, and all the death of Stalin and all the others, it's like those are horrible, horrible, horrible things that you can say is evil. But because it happened, we can know so much if we just look at it, and if we just observe it, and if we just pay attention
and even
to all those things that have happened.
Even if we as individuals in our societies don't look at those things at a transcendent, higher dimensional level, all of the evil, the whole totality of all evil that has ever occurred in space and time is weighed against all of the good. And there's always both. If there wasn't good, people would not be continuing to propagate and have children. There wouldn't be familial events that we go to where we love on our families. We would kill ourselves. Everyone would just literally cease existing because evil was so rampant in our world that we would not any longer find a meaning in it, and we would just die. So there's always balance.
C.K. has this awful joke where he says, he goes, you ever like see somebody and you think, why haven't they just ended it? Like, and it's so terrible. But like at the same time, like you meet people who are in these such lower circumstances than you, yet they have a family and they have this will to live.
Exactly.
Like Schopenhauer's will to live.
Exactly. There's always love and there's always evil. And I have an ontological philosophical statement that I will not make here because I'm saving it for my book on the nature of good versus evil and that hierarchical process. But ultimately, it's all reconciled in the end. Everything reconciles. This is why as above, so below, as the first Hermetic principle of the Hermetic order, it is what it is, because everything reconciles in the end. As we're individuals, we find, we have family, we have love, we have pleasures, we do these things that counterbalance all the bad in the world. It seems as if like the majority of the evils, like we can experience evil as individuals, right? We can be raped and killed and stolen from, and we can do all of those same things. We can experience anger and all that. But as you try to expand your consciousness through this imaginary, visionary process of our cognitive functions, we expand our awareness, our sphere of awareness outwards to our peer group, and then our school, and maybe our city, and then our state, and all this. As we get bigger and bigger and bigger in scope, we are making more and more and more and more assumptions on the nature of reality, because I don't actually know what's happening in that person who lives 5 miles away's life. I'm making a generalization and an assumption based on all of these factors, right? And I'm like contriving all of these things in my head as I view the world. Plus, there's a lens of media and news and everyone else, wizards with agendas. And so we can't help but lose sight of the nature of reality as we look at the larger spectrum and scope of the world.
Yeah.
Because we're going outside of ourselves and we're taking the perceptions that we have for granted when we're not actually perceiving the things directly through gnosis. We are taking words and opinions as fact, which Mortimer Adler has a lot to say against that. And so it's easy to lose sight of the truisms of our reality, which is really just love. Like there's mostly love in most people's realities, even in the most impoverished. And if we can somehow adopt this optimistic worldview that love is at the top of all hierarchical systems, including that which includes evil and hatred and destitution and destruction and everything, I think that we can make positive moves towards unifying opposites in a way where our social constructs and our contracts and our value systems will all align, whether or not the minutia or the detail always are agreed upon. If we can all adopt love as our number one value, I think that like the world will actually change for sure, because it doesn't matter about the details anymore. All things are reconciling, all opposites are being reconciled, but we just love each other like family. Going back to the family talk that we had earlier, globalization, seeing humanity as brothers and sisters because we are all in one tribe. That's very woo-woo, very new age, very like hippy dippy, but that is the goddamn truth. And just in the same way that like you'll steal from your parents.
Bruce Lee always said that.
Yeah, dude, you're a shithead, man. You fucking need some drugs, or maybe you're just a kid and you need to go out and do something. You stole from your parents. Okay. Maybe you know, you got a brother who really likes this girl, but you're just a dude and your dick is hard and you really want to just like fuck that girl. Well, maybe you did. And now you and your brother are going to fight about it. Maybe, you know, shit happens. We hurt the people we love because our limited perspectives
You know,
disallow us.
it's important to
but family will always bring it back. That's
well,
all I'm
yeah,
trying to say.
but to expound on that one level, that's really important. If you, because a lot of times we say that and it sounds so like cute and like a great idea, whether you want to say it's
optimistic
or you want to, whatever you say that it is, whether it's realistic, optimistic, or pessimistic, whatever. If you look at certain things like the way that even Joe Biden sticks up for his son, or the way that that's like another meta level perhaps, but
too meta for this
discussion. but the way that
too much nuance,
but the way that a mother especially, or a father, but usually a mother, can love her struggling child even as they go through like becoming a hardcore tweaker, crackhead, whatever, that's the kind of like meta family we need to have to really transcend to the 100%. Next level, where we can look at the
unconditional love, man.
Yeah, well, not just unconditional, like
that's what it is.
Yeah, I love you anyway, but to where like we just like if the crackhead on Skid Row was our actual brother or actual son or actual father, then we really, really don't want to just.
Well, there's that, you know,
yeah, man, brothers and sisters under the sun. That's what I'm trying to say. Exactly that.
Yeah, but
most, and it's almost like,
don't joke.
If we understood the circumstances of every single individual, it would probably be easier for us to do this, because we do this thing where we, you know, someone gets, molested or raped, or they get, you know, they get their house robbed,
they starve,
and awful things. And then they end up perpetuating that in their later life and getting in trouble. And we yell at them for that, for something that they have trauma for in the past. It's this never ending cycle. But if we could actually put ourselves in their perspective, people who have experienced plight that we haven't, we would be less apt to damn those who we perceive as causing trouble.
Yeah, that's the nature of grace and graciousness. But the difference is like from a Protestant perspective or whatever, you know, grace is giving forgiveness and love to those who don't deserve it, by definition. Graciousness in the transcendent is like recognizing, like, if you were that person, lived their entire life experience, and your brain chemistry was their brain chemistry, you literally were that person with everything that ever occurred in a sort of deterministic standpoint, you would have done the same exact things that they did. You would be that person. So there's a degree of graciousness and forgiveness, because we recognize that the nature of reality is such that it is a system of reflection. It is a system of meta processes from the beginning of time to the end of time, of literally, in order for reality to uphold its own self, it has to reflect itself. Yeah. So that's an archetype. That's a shadow.
That, but I'm also torn, and maybe that's just my own. Maybe that's just the human condition, because I was driving Uber today, and I picked up these two women who were obviously, they were obviously tweakers, right? And at first, I picked them up from jail. Like, they both had just been released from jail, and at one point, I was like, they're talking all this ghetto nonsense about like, selling drugs and robbing people and stuff like that. And then at one point, like I overheard one of the girls say to the other girls, she said, so much has happened in my life that I don't ever want to stop using because I don't want to internalize it all. And it literally split me down the fucking middle because I'm like, okay, on one hand, I've had this really blessed life where I don't know what she's been through that causes her to think that way, that she has had so much suffering that she would rather use drugs for the rest of her life and acknowledge it than ever face it. But then also this other part of me wants to be like, well, what are you doing? Like, why can't you just like, if you're so conscious of that, why can't you just wake up to the fact?
Right. Exactly.
And kind of find a way to get over it.
It's the same thing like with Jesus dying on the cross, like 100%, like Father, forgive them for they know not what they do. Even if we have awareness, there's still levels. Like the world is complicated, right? So that's why when I say like we should treat each other as if we're all family, brothers and sisters under the sun, blah blah blah, like that is very hippy dippy, very new age, very optimistic. But there is a level of reality in which like you have to draw lines, you have to make like there are still value structures you have to uphold. There's still punishments for crimes. You can't allow those things to occur. But the difference, I think, the most fundamental difference that we could inseminate within our souls is like actual love and forgiveness for those people and understanding their circumstances, even though we are dropping the fucking ban hammer on them or we're putting them in prison or we're killing them for their crimes or whatever's happening. Because and that's Gevura, right? In the tree of life, in Etayim, in Kabbalah, that's the tree, that's the pillar of severity of God. God loves all people, right? To the Protestants, to the Catholics, to the whatever. God is all loving. God is everywhere. But there's evil, and God still judges the evil. And
do you think that one way to say it though is, and sorry to interrupt you, my bad.
Yeah, you're good.
But do you think one way to say it though is that to say that there's no such thing as people who are wicked, there's just people who have been corrupted?
I mean, that's a really, really, really big question that like you just dropped a bomb on me. I would say off the top of my head without thinking too much about it, because I haven't thought about it very much before in my life. I would say that there's no such thing as a wicked person, that it's all corrupted people.
I agree.
100%.
Well,
100%
but to take that to one other level real quick, it's that everybody is bad. You could even say evil, but also everybody is good. You could even say in anything else.
We're animals and we're divine, right? Like we're all we're that whole thing.
Yeah, and we all have to, and so people are pitifully victims to the bad ideas that they have. And sometimes the pitiful victims of good ideas. Like we can have a great idea and think, wow, I'm a genius because I just invented pizza or Facebook or sliced bread or whatever. But you just kind of like tapped into some collective idea and then you put it out on the collective or, whatever. Same thing with anything else. We are victims to whatever ideas,
circumstance, I would say, not even just ideas.
A lot of things, but how our cognition flows through us. It's whatever that we surrender to. We can surrender to a horrible idea or a pretty good idea, and then we can do whatever we want to with it.
But the most cliche form of that is the Native American, like you have the wolves within you. There's the light wolf and there's the dark wolf. I think that's a very
which one's gonna win? The one you feed the most?
Yeah, exactly. You can choose which one you feed the most. Exactly. It's very new age.
Urim and Thummim, I think, is the two names of the rocks.
Really?
I think it's Zoroastrianism, or if you just read The Alchemist, I think it's Urim and Thummim. The rocks, same idea.
I think our personality fragments into much more than just two, but I think that's a good way to.
But it's all held within two, man. It's all held within. Everything is held within duality.
All the fragments are fragmented into a dual unity.
Right.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Triangles on triangles, which is why when game programmers develop video games and they're creating all of the character frames and the environments and all of the things in the code, it's all triangles. Like if you look at the geometry of how those shapes and figures are all built, it's literally triangles. Everything is triangles, literally everything, which is really funny because the fundamental nature of reality is, again, according to Pythagoras and sacred geometry and even some of the other wisdom occult schools, it's the triangle. It's the number 3. It's the triad or the trinity. It's number 3. Which is represented by the triangle in geometry. But again, so yeah, man, Isaac, you were talking about everyone is a victim of good ideas and bad ideas as they embody them and play their roles because they're ignorant.
That's a Shakespeare quote.
Oh, really? Well, that's beautiful. I did
Here,
not know
let
that.
me read it real quick, just because I brought it up actually at the beginning of this.
Yeah.
It's one that I'm doing in a play, but we'll get into that another
What?
day.
Wait, you're a thespian? Don't lie.
We'll see. It's
Hell
just
yeah.
one little quote ahead.
Hey,
What's that?
brothers.
You're a thespian. He's a thespian,
Yeah,
bro.
thespian bros.
I got thespian bros, bro. They're really cool. One of my best, like, not I wouldn't say best friend, but one of my good childhood, like, high school friends. His name's Kalen McRae. Shout out to Kalen. He actually he did theater through all of our high school experience and even into college and beyond. And he's like he has his own theater now, dude.
Yeah,
like he's like an entrepreneur about it.
I was a child actor, so
this isn't.
Fuck you, Connor.
This isn't much of thespianism. It's just like a drunk rambling this Shakespeare quote. But this I actually even expanded out to get the whole context. Shakespeare, I'd have to look it up, like from what play this is from, but he says, "All the world's a stage, and all men and women are merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages." I'm not sure what the 7 ages is at the end, but anyway, basically we're all just players on this, and that is the nature of human limitation reality that we have to accept, and it's frustrating. That's like rule number 12, pet a cat, in 12 Rules of Life by Peterson. This human limitation, and that's why you're like, I'm so frustrated that I can't you
cannot escape it, man.
Yeah,
you're a slave. That's why I made a Facebook post and I said to exist is to be a slave. And so many people got so mad at me because they didn't understand what I was saying. But it also plays in my own personal ontology. But yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. But so Isaac, so all people are slaves to their own limitations, right? And we're all
limitations and to the ideas that we surrender. So like kind of what I see as sort of like a transcendent sort of higher level of you could even just simply say wisdom is to start to see these games that we get caught in. And first you got to accept there's no escaping the game of games. So choosing to not play certain games is a game, but it's a higher order game than to choose to jump into some of these lower level games like
meta game.
Like I hate Republicans or I hate Democrats or orange
game
men.
Is game. There's always game no matter what you do.
But the more you can choose to step back and play the non-game within the game, or it's not
play the meta game. You just play the meta game. That's all.
But the more you choose to, and you're cognizant, that's kind of where the perception comes in. But you're cognizant of perspective. Okay, now I need to maybe jump on this side, or if I do, I've got to pay attention. Or if I don't, then I've got to pay attention to what's going on the left and right in front of me, or whatever whatever the polarity is. And then, go ahead.
So there's a tremendous level of effort that has to be given. All right. There's a huge level of effort that you have to forego and just give to the process. Ken Wilber's philosophy is called integral because he creates a system called AQAL, or all quadrant, all level. We talk about it in our channel, in which any phenomena that you look at, any phenomenon that exists in multiple layers of reality, multiple spectrums, from the physical to the biological, to the mental, to the emotional, to the societal, to the archetypal, to the, architectural artistry. Like literally, there are concepts that exist. Every concept or every item, every object, every thought, every feeling exists and has its own level of manifestation on all levels of reality. This is as above, so below, the first occult tenet of Hermeticism. And if you really, truly want to be able to control your life as a wizard and not be a victim of circumstance and not be subject to your limitations, even though we are always subject to our limitations, if you're trying your hardest to transcend and break through those limitations, how you do so is through perspective. The domain of reference in which you can view your reality has to become bigger and bigger and bigger, more expansive, more inclusive, and more integral.
So you appreciate that, the tweakers that Connor picked up today.
I tell people, man.
There's so much truth in that interaction with the tweakers, and so you got to love and appreciate random little tweakers like that.
Yes,
and then at the same time, you have to look at everyone with that kind of compassion, and So it's got to be up to the highest level and down to the
And the
lowest
lowest.
level at the
But
same
you
time.
also have
Right.
to you also have to express what's the term I'm looking for here? It's discernment. You still have to use discernment, right? You still have to use judgment, good process, value,
Right.
judgment.
Right. Like even though I
love
wasn't
that
able to
tweaker.
connect with those people,
I'm
even
not
though I
going to
was able to
invite them into
connect
my
with them,
house, right? I'm not going to
Exactly.
invite them
Thank
into my
you.
house around my child.
Or like, here,
I'll feed them.
babysitter.
Yeah, like maybe I'll feed them, maybe I'll clothe them, I'll love them, I won't judge them, like I'm not going to hate on them, I'm not going to invest, I'm not going to like allow like hateful thoughts to fester within my soul so I can speak evil upon them as soon as I get out of my car and put that out into the cosmos for it to reflect back
Right.
upon me. I'm going to tell them I love them and tell them I hope their life gets better, maybe lead by an example and sow a seed. Maybe that in that one interaction I can tell them I love them or show them I love them in a way that like will hopefully in the future grow into an actual plant that's viable, that they can use for sustenance, that they can then use to plant a seed in someone else, no matter what, right? And it's all about perspective, though. Everything is about perspective, and the more expansive your perspective, the more holistic you can see the entirety of reality, the more control you have, and the less you are an automatic unconscious reflection, because all of reality is simply a process of reflections that are either happening consciously or unconsciously, because that entire process of conscious and unconscious is simply a reflection. And this is again part of my own metaphysics. I'm writing about it in my book. Like it'll be out in hopefully a year or two, but essentially everything you're talking about, Isaac, is just simply perspective and awareness, because we will always be limited. That's why I am frustrated. I feel like I'm going to die, and there's nothing I can do to help people other than record my thoughts on mediums like this for other people. But I can't 5 generations from now, people will still have to do work as individuals to make it work. And
a lot of
I
times
could bring someone to your recordings, but I couldn't force them to absorb the information.
Exactly. And you have to have grace for those people too. And you have to understand everyone's on their own path. And so Isaac, to bring up Isaac and Connor, to bring up crackheads a long time ago when I first no, for real, dude. Like when I
release
first,
the crackheads.
Woo! When I first started finding my path in spirituality and like becoming a philosopher, I would say, I had compassion for crackheads, and the understanding of myself through this unity consciousness as like this greater than me process, as Connor says, just process occurring. I recognize that we also do not necessarily need to change the minds of every single individual on planet Earth to be exactly like us, because there would be no more nuance. There'd be no more duality.
We absolutely should avoid that.
Exactly. Even though that's like what our entire goal is with our channel, is to reach as many people, to influence them as heavily as possible, to see the world in our perspective.
But if people were united right now, we wouldn't do it. You know what I mean?
There'd be no purpose
feel that
in it.
Right now, people just happen to be in. Yeah,
exactly. We create problems and we try to fix them because we're just stuck in this endless loop of fuckery, right? It's frustrating.
Well,
but ultimately, what I'm trying to say is, I realized at one point in my life, I was trying to tell everyone that, like, this is the truth of reality. This is what's happening. This is my perspective. You should adopt it. Hey, teach me your perspective. I want to know the real truth of reality. Please teach me your perspective. Hey, this is the truth. You should listen to me. And like, it was this game of back and forth, learning and teaching and learning and teaching. And that's still what I'm about. But before, it used to be predicated on I must learn the truth and I must teach the truth. And at one point, I really, really adopted that idea. Now I feel differently. I feel like it's still okay to allow the falsity to exist. It's okay to allow deluded people to exist, because the crackhead on the side of the road, who's literally not doing anything but sucking the life out of himself and bottom feeding off of society, still in the grand scheme of all of reality, back from the very bottom to the top of the Godhead, still has value and contributes value in multiple ways.
And he has he has roughly as much value as anyone else.
Exactly.
There's a line in the Tao that says, if you tamper with it, you'll ruin it. If you clutch onto it, you'll lose it. And if you look for it, you'll never find it. And I really believe that's true when it comes. It's exactly what you're saying. You don't want to. Why tamper with the balance that is the diversity of opinion that we all get to experience.
Right. It's all perfectly imperfect, and everyone is on their path, and all paths reconcile. In the end, good and evil will reconcile. At the transcendental object at the end of time, all things will reconcile. The only thing that you can really control is yourself as an individual. and your karma and your path and your soul. And that's why all the Christians would be like, the end is coming near, revelation's coming, just get right
Yeah.
with God, just get right with God, just
The
get right with
rapture
God.
could happen any moment. Everybody's
Like
gonna
it's
get sucked
so
up in
easy
the
to get
sky.
right with God.
Yeah, just get right with God. That's all you can do.
Oh,
But
okay.
in the truth, though,
BRB.
that's it. That's truly it.
Hold
Because
my beer. I'm gonna get right with God.
truly, if you subscribe to the idea that
Exactly, yeah.
like the monad is the truth, that there's one unity consciousness at the end of time that we all are a part of, just cells in the body of Christ or whatever, like your falsity is reconciled by the ultimate truth in the end. Like everything that you do that's fucked up will become okay because you are all part of the same process. You are all part of the same Godhead.
Right.
And but then people are like, oh, but then that means we can do whatever we want. Yes and no. Like
Exactly.
that
Yes
means
and
like
no, exactly.
morals and ethics is arbitrary, but it doesn't take away from the fact that like the nuance and the cascading events
That's
of
such a good point, dude.
evolution are not real or that they're not meaningful, right? Like everything is and everything isn't, and contradiction is the highest truth. Be a piece of shit if you want to. You're gonna have to deal with those consequences. I want to live my life in peace and have abundance and joy and love. So that's how I'm gonna live. But in the end, you and me, we're both gonna be okay, homie. We're both the same being in the end of the fucking reality construct in my belief system. But I'm still going to propagate love and goodness and beauty. And that's what I hope to do in every motion that I make in my life. And I guess that's what I'm just trying to say, Isaac, is we're
It's
all
a great thing to tell
here.
somebody who's going through a hard time, to be honest. But
Get
it's
your shit
9:30.
together.
I kind of have to wrap it up, but I think that was a great place to end it. Does anybody have any final
I
thoughts?
just want to say everyone's limited. We all have our limitations despite our limitations and despite the fact that everything potentially is arbitrary and potentially everything reconciles in the end. We still have choices to make. There still is a yes and a no. There still is a light and a dark. And you should make the right choices and try to better yourself. And that takes effort and work and a lot of self introspection. And we should all have conversations with each other and forgive each other. Forgive your neighbors when they're wrong. Forgive yourself because you're wrong a fuckload of the time. And just like everybody have grace and fucking love yourself and love your neighbors, man, because that's all you got. Because we're all gonna die, dude. And when you look at reality from that lens, your problems, the problems on earth, like, oh, I broke my nail, or oh, my boyfriend left me, or oh, I'm starving. No matter what the fuck it is, it's a little ass problem, dude. Like it's big to you, but it's little. So everybody just have graciousness in your heart, spread love, be wise, let foolery fight itself. Shout out to King Los. That's all I really want to say.
Is that all? Okay.
Is that all?
Yeah.
No,
a couple,
not really.
A couple kind of quick ideas I'll try to make on closing. One is one thing I think we might talk about sometime is on this same token that you can just get into this metaphor a long time is actually Lord of the Rings has a really good imagery of the two towers and how that at the beginning they were at one tower that was good and that tower got corrupted, so then they had to reconcile it by going to the evil tower that had the sort of evil eye or whatever on top of it. But we'll get into that maybe another day if we can get into this subject again. We should, because that's Yakin and Boaz. Yeah.
From the Freemasons and the Kabbalah, the Kabbalists. That's like Yakin and Boaz.
Yeah,
so we'll get into it on the next one.
Yeah, I think that's the best metaphor or imagery, at least that we have in our sort of put together modern world is that book, and especially
it's
how it comes across in those movies.
It's the pillars of King Solomon's temple, Yakin and Boaz, and then Tolkien used those concepts. But hell yeah. So my bad.
Then the other thing is you're talking a lot about the future and sort of like even a utopian concept, but Jung talked a lot about this idea of in one of his last books that he really got in depth with was Mysterium Conjunctionis. And the way that was is he talked about essentially the modern world is a midlife crisis or transitioning from how that the world had been, how that we can talk about it, that how it was very, unified in its tribal ways, that people will be unified in their gods or their tribal ways of whatever that it was. And now we're going through this midlife crisis because the whole world's kind of like smushing together and having to deal with all those values that were in it and everything else. And so the next like level that we're trying to get to is the unification of that, which is called the Conjunctio. And so he gives the example.
Alchemical process.
Yeah, he gives the example earlier in that book, and Ed Edinger also talked about it. How just like in if you look at a group that's very religious, they would say, if they wanted to say, hey, you're behaving badly, they would say something like, that has nothing to do with the divine, or that has nothing to do with our God when you're behaving badly. And in the future, the way that he sees it is, people will say, why are you doing that? That has nothing to do with the Conjunctio. But the Conjunctio is this unification of the opposites. And it's that when it's that we gain the principle to, whenever we look at a particular thing or a particular conflict or a particular idea, that we immediately start looking to see both sides and unify them rather than jumping onto it. So there we go. That's how we can achieve world peace.
What happens after the sublimation? Sublimation occurs. So like there's all of these
sublimatio.
Yeah, there's all of these depending on what school of thought, really quick, depending on what school of thought you come from, there's 7 or 12, sometimes more, usually 7 or 12 alchemical processes.
Right.
Sublimation is like where you turn the solid into a vapor, and then it re-solidifies through a process of like purification, and then you use conjunctio, like you can join it right with its opposite through the purification to achieve the transcendent. So that's what Isaac's talking about.
Yeah, so I guess I'll just end it with a little bit of a pragmatic challenge for the viewers.
Sure.
As we approach the holidays, maybe something to see if you can try to change things up a little bit, spice things up, is when you see an argument arising amongst your family, instead of trying to prove them wrong, explain to them why you think you're both wrong and why you think you're both right. And that might maybe change the whole dynamic of your Thanksgiving dinner or your Christmas dinner.
Also, if that's not fun for you, then you could try to look at the value, right? Like from where Isaac would say, look at the value. You could always, as another thought experiment, look instead of what they're actually saying, and look at the why behind what they're saying, and look at look at the underlying value from what they're getting out of what they're saying. And then when you're arguing with them, look at your value. And if those values align, then maybe take a step back and realize that the details and the minutia of what is actually being said is just a complete illusion. And you're both aligning on the same values, and you should probably just like love each other and try to live your lives in a way where you can make sure that your needs are both met. So,
okay, that's one point.
And also remember that you can tell a lot about a person, yourself or others included, what they are for by what they say that they are against. And I think that's really important when talking about the unification of opposites, is remembering that it's easy to be against something, but it's much harder to be for something in a succinct way. So
beautiful. Isaac, what were you going to say? And then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I was just going to say that if you look at the way any sort of argument is, whether it's over Christmas or it's over doing dishes or it's over who the president of the United States is, the natural tendency is to either say, I have to defend my position, tell the other side how evil they are. And then all that does is it makes things more polarized. And then we think sometimes that the way to overcome that is to give in and just say, okay, fine, you're right. But the actual way to sort of a unification is to slowly but surely work your way towards the middle. And as that you do that, even if the other person is unaware of it, they do the same thing until you're unified in the middle.
And the last thing that I'll say on that, which we also say in our channel in the Union of Opposites segment, foundational episode, which will be released before this one, so go check that one out. We'll link it in the description. Is if you're trying your hardest to meet in the middle on whatever polarized topic, and you just cannot find yourself being able to accept the tenets of the other side to a level which allows you to meet in the middle, the union of opposites also means to just live and let live, to recognize that the other, that the opposition defines your perspective. You literally are you, and you feel the way you feel because the other exists. So take that in grace, and as best as you can, follow Karl Popper's paradox of tolerance, and just try your best to live and let live, man. Like, that's all I could say.
All right, guys. Well, this has been a very special episode of The Archive. Feel free to check out our Facebook page, Twitter, Instagram. We're also going to be on Spotify, iTunes, Google, all those other platforms. And please check out the Daily Archetype. It's Isaac's podcast. You can find his Facebook page. You can find him on Spotify, pretty much every platform. Same with The Archive. And thank you very much for tuning in. And
Thanks, guys.
That's Isaac.
Great conversation.
Thank you. Yeah.